Sophia sat in the living room, enveloped by the oppressive silence of the house. Everything around her seemed unchanged, as if time had frozen at the moment her son David died. The sun was setting slowly, and the golden light streaming through the window highlighted the dust particles dancing in the air. However, the warm glow that once brought a sense of peace now felt like a cruel reminder of all she had lost. Since the death of David, a boy of only 5 years, instead to drown in her grief. The house that was once filled with laughter and toys was now a prison of painful memories. David's little room remained untouched, his toys still scattered about as if he might walk in any moment to play again. At night, the emptiness was even harder to bear. Sophia used to hear David's laughter echoing through the hallways, but now silence was all that remained. She could barely get out of bed. Her days passed in a fog of apathy. The pain of loss was so intense it felt physical, as if every part of her had been destroyed along with her son. She avoided any outside contact, convinced no one could understand what she was feeling. But as time passed, Sophia began to sense something different. It was hard to describe, but there was a new presence in the house. The air felt denser, heavier. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with unresolved emotions. She began to wonder if David was still there in some way. That night, when she went to bed, Sophia lay down and closed her eyes, expecting another dreamless night where her son no longer existed. But this time, something woke her in the middle of the night. The room was dark, except for the faint light of the moon filtering through the half-drawn curtains. And then she saw him. David was standing beside her bed. Shock gripped Sophia. She was paralyzed, unsure if she was awake or still trapped in some kind of nightmare. Her eyes focused on the small, unmoving figure beside the bed. It was David, in the same pajamas he often wore, his brown hair tousled and his big dark eyes, just as she remembered. But something about him seemed different, a strange serenity that didn't match the lively, joyful child he used to be. Sophia's heart raced, yet oddly, she wasn't afraid. What she felt was a mix of sadness and relief, as though, somehow, the emptiness consuming her had been temporarily filled by her son's presence. She didn't know how or why, but David was there, back again. David, her voice came out as a broken whisper. He didn't respond. He just stood there, watching her, motionless, his eyes fixed on her. The silence between them was suffocating, but Sophia didn't care. All she wanted was to be near him, to feel her son's presence again, even if it was a shadow of what he once was. She tried to reach out to touch him, but hesitated. Something stopped her, as though her mind knew there was something deeply wrong with the scene, though her heart desperately wanted to believe it was real. Slowly, David faded, dissolving into the air like mist. The next morning, Sophia woke with the feeling that it had all been a dream. She replayed the moment in her mind, trying to understand what had happened. Was she going mad? Had her grief consumed her sanity to the point she was seeing her dead son? But deep down, she knew it had been real. David had returned, and Sophia began to eagerly anticipate his next appearance. In the days that followed, David's presence became almost constant. He appeared every night, always beside her bed, silent. Sophia began to feel strangely comforted by her son's presence. She believed David had returned to stay with her, to fill the void left by his death. David appeared again that night. Sophia was used to seeing him by her bed by now, but this time something was different. He seemed closer, more real. The desire to touch him grew with each encounter, until finally she couldn't resist anymore. Tears filled her eyes as she reached out for David. He didn't move, didn't react. He just stood there, waiting. When her arms wrapped around him, Sophia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. For a brief moment, she felt warmth, as if the embrace brought back everything she had lost. But soon that warmth vanished, replaced by an intense cold that penetrated her bones. It was as if something was being ripped from inside her. The embrace, instead of filling the void, seemed to deepen it. David's body was cold, and Sophia felt strangely weak, as though her energy was being drained. The embrace, which should have been comforting, began to feel like a trap. When she finally let go of David, Sophia collapsed back onto the bed, exhausted. She could barely breathe. The weight of physical and emotional exhaustion was crushing. David remained there, motionless, before disappearing again. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to comprehend what had just happened. In the days that followed, she felt the effects of that embrace. Something was wrong. Sophia was weak, exhausted in a way she had never felt before. Every time David returned, she tried to resist the urge to touch him, but the temptation was too great. The desire to feel her son again consumed her, and she embraced him every night. Even though she knew that with each touch, a part of her was disappearing. Over time, Sophia realized that after each embrace, the void inside her grew larger. She not only felt physically weak, but emotionally drained. Things that had once mattered, like eating, leaving the house, or even thinking of David as he was before his death, began to slip from her mind. David's embrace was consuming her life. And yet, she couldn't stop. The desire to be near her son, to hold him, outweighed her growing concern. It was as if that embrace was the only thing keeping her alive, though it was slowly killing her. The house, once a sanctuary of memories, now felt like a prison. Sophia felt more and more isolated, not only from the outside world, but from herself. Little things began to disappear from her mind, as if they were being carried away by David's arms. She could no longer remember simple details of daily life, like what she had for breakfast, or which appointments she had cancelled. Worse still, Sophia felt as if she were losing essential parts of who she was. The love she felt for David was still there, but everything else seemed to be slipping away. The house was silent during the day, and time passed without her noticing. The only thing that kept her aware of her own existence was David's presence at night. When he appeared, it seemed like everything around her made sense again. But when she embraced him, the feeling of loss grew. Each time he disappeared, Sophia felt a part of herself leaving with him. The most frightening part was that she didn't know what was being taken. Was it her memories, her soul? Sophia began to question her own reality. Was she still alive? At times, it felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, where time had no meaning and the walls of the house suffocated her. At other times, it felt like she was already dead, just wandering through a lifeless space. Each night, David's embrace left her emptier, more distant from who she used to be. But Sophia couldn't stop. She didn't know what else to do but surrender to his presence. The embrace, though painful, seemed to be the only connection she had left to the world. Deep down, she began to wonder, was she really embracing her son? Or was something else there, taking his form and slowly draining her life? The realization came suddenly, like a wave of cold that ran down Sophia's spine. During one of their nightly embraces, something finally shifted in her vision of David. His form seemed distorted, as if the outlines of his figure were slightly blurred. Sophia blinked, trying to clear her vision, but as she watched him, something darker revealed itself. It was no longer the angelic face of David she was embracing. The entity, which had once resembled her son, now revealed its true face, a shapeless shadow feeding off her pain and despair. It was as if this creature had used David's image to get close to her, to manipulate and drain her. Sophia tried to pull away, but she couldn't. She was deeply bound to it, both emotionally and physically. The pain of knowing it wasn't her son returning each night, but a malevolent presence, was unbearable. Everything she thought had been filling the void in her heart now seemed like a cruel deception. She knew what it meant. With every embrace, Sophia was being slowly pulled toward death. The entity was consuming her, using her pain as a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Sophia knew the end was near. The next embrace would be the last, and she no longer had the strength to resist. The void that had consumed her since David's death now took over her entire being. Deep down, she had already accepted her fate. That night, David appeared one final time. His figure, though still familiar, now seemed like a distant shadow of who he once was. Exhausted and defeated, Sophia opened her arms. She knew that by embracing him, she would disappear completely, but at the same time, she felt there was no other way. The embrace was the only way to end the pain. When she embraced him, she felt her life draining quickly. Darkness engulfed her, and in her last moments of consciousness, Sophia accepted what was coming. She was leaving, but in her mind, she believed she would finally be with David again. And then, there was only silence.